Asia surpassed the US in the number of billionaires for the first time in history, according to the list by UBS and PricewaterhouseCoopers. What does this say about and mean for the world economy? China had 318 billionaires at the end of 2016 compared to 215 1 year earlier. How did these billionaires accumulate their wealth in such a short time? And what will they do for their country? It is said that many of America's super rich give their money to charitable causes while the Chinese rich are busy moving their money abroad. What are the differences between the super rich of Asia and the West? Some Chinese billionaires have become fund investors in innovation technology, public welfare and environmental protection. How will this new focus impact the development of Chinese high-tech and innovation in the future?
For the first time in history, there are now more billionaires from Asia than America, according to the World Super Rich list by UBS and PricewaterhouseCoopers. 637 in Asia and 563 in the US. And among the Asian membership of the ultra-wealthy club, China's 318 billionaires are increasingly making their presence felt. But in what ways is this happening? Compared with the billionaires from Europe and North America, what are the key characteristics of the new super rich in Asia, especially in China? And what influence will they exert on our society and values? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Wenran Jiang, Senior Fellow with the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia, and Dr. Wang Huiyao, President of the Center for China and Globalization. We shall also speak to Robert Cab, Director of the Economist Corporate Network via satellite from Hong Kong. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Gentlemen, first and foremost, many people are wondering aloud, how could the super rich list be formulated by the two organizations, UBS and PricewaterhouseCoopers, to collect the statistics and facts on the super rich guys in China and the world over? What do you think are the approaches?
Well, I think it's a common practice. You know, it's a well-established industry. You know, like the Forbes list, the Fortune list, and also the Robert list in China as well. You have so many lists in the past. So basically, they calculate your worth, particularly if you have a company listed on the stock market. So the value of your share reflect the personal wealth that you can have. So if the stock market had high price, which means you have a high wealth, net worth of wealth, and if market goes down, you have a less. So that's probably happening. But also, I think they have the measure from all other angles as well, like investment, real estate, buildings, and patent technology. So I think it's a comprehensive measure. But most of it, I think it's getting from the stock value listing.
Well, I'm afraid Henry Huiyao has been a bit too optimistic about the transparency of new wealth in China, because many of the super rich guys from southern China, the more prosperous coastal provinces like Fujian, Guangdong, want to keep a low profile without exposing their wealth and assets to the rich list. What do you think of the transparency itself?
Well, there are limitations. I think Huiyao mentioned we got a lot of data now available, and the information travel very fast. And there are people who go around very professionally collecting these materials and data. But as you said, there are people who don't list their assets. They do not list on the stock market, and they keep it on the low profile, and sometimes they're not making into the list. That even adding more about the fact that we have more rich people than listed. Isn't that something?
That's true. I think, particularly in China, a lot of private enterprises, if they haven't gone public, IPO, and then their value is hidden, and then sometimes it's very difficult to measure that. But I think the UBS and the PricewaterhouseCoopers are professional agencies and banks that they have a right way to do that. I think that's give a credible assessment, at least for the ballpark numbers.
Right. The authenticity of the results should not be underestimated. As a result of the joint efforts by UBS and PricewaterhouseCoopers, let's look at the issue of risks, the vulnerabilities of the Chinese new wealth. I mean, are they well protected by the Constitution and civil law in this Chinese society? Because we didn't have this history of protecting the private ownership of private assets. Look at the brutality of the Cultural Revolution. I mean, many of the private enterprises were confiscated. They went bankrupt due to the political pressure, so on and so forth. Today, of course, we have a new era of socialism with the Chinese characteristics.
Yes.
What about the protection of their private assets? I mean, do the private businessmen and their families have the basic feeling of safety and security under the new circumstances in China?
I think that still I'm quite sure that not all of them are all felt secured, particularly in China, because given the history, I think that the rich list we have in China are the first generation. Most of them are first generations. So it's not like the U.S., it's second generation. Second, the high accelerated growth of China for the last 40 years has generated a lot of rich list that combined with different industry, different market, and different situation. Thirdly, I think that even though we have said the private rights is protected, but still I think we're lacking probably some detailed implementation and detailed protection probably. And that's actually generated some concern. For example, in the EB5 investment category into the U.S., out of the 10,000 quota, 9,000 applied by the Chinese. So you can see that there's still a big urge to go abroad for some of the investment that they have. And finally, I think also the charity law and things like that still needs to be more transparent and more encouraging, because the money they have is getting more punished, and maybe there's no good incentive for them to donate or to generate to the society.
Well, what do you think of the alleged hate rich campaign? I mean, in Chinese, 仇富心理, some of the hate speeches, hate attitudes, hate words went viral on the internet with regard to the novel Heish. It's not just about the corporate social responsibility or the issue of charity. It's just about something wrong with those guys. I mean, those at the grassroots level, the 屌丝, the angry youth, they would be always very critical of the super rich billionaires. Why? And do you think they should be protected by law? And why do you think the public opinions are sometimes not quite in favor of the novel Heish?
Well, the Chinese history, if you go back to thousands of years, we got cycles of growing inequality, the rich getting richer and poorer getting poorer, and then you got social crisis.
Are you alluding to the issue of egalitarianism?
Absolutely. I mean, historically, that's what led to rebellions of the peasantry over the years and centuries. And now, I don't see that change if you have continuous inequality. I think that comes back to the latest party congress, identifying the main contradictions for that, of the unbalanced development and inequality issues. It says something about that. But abroad, in the United States, in Western European countries, in Canada, where I live, they have the similar issues. How do you deal with inequality? But back to your central question, in Western societies, there's a very mature, commonly acknowledged, much mature, longer history of protecting private property. And in China, as we all mentioned, we have a very short history. These are first generation, second generation rich, and therefore the state, very state-dominant country, society in China, has a long way to go in providing adequate protection. I would say that's a fear for the rich, other than the so-called masses rebellion or hate or against the rich. I mean, those are the problems you have to deal with.
I agree with Wen Zhan. I think that the culture of donation, the culture of giving away, is not really established yet. For example, you see in the U.S. you have Carnegie, you have Brookings, you have Ford, you have
Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation.
All those big guys, their legacy are kept on their donation, not on how big money they made. I think we're still going through that stage yet. So I think, in the end, it's really if they want to make a name in history, it's the donation and also contributing to the society and contributing to the welfare of the society, and also help the poor and so also those not well balanced and not inadequate development.
Do you believe it's time to have more of the trust funds to manage private assets? It's been a long history in the West, but I think this is something novel in China. We don't have such a, right? But some of the investment banks start the business of asset management. What about the family trust funds?
Absolutely. I think the China, the apparatus, and also the structure, it's all falling behind in terms of how to set up a taxation system, encouraging the donors to, billionaires to donate, and also give them the credential and also recognition, praise. For example, the Fuyao glass, Mr. Chao Do-wang, I mean, he's the biggest donor in China, but he got criticized.
But he fled the mainland. He's
not fled mainland.
Automobile business in the Rust Belt, right?
He diversified.
He diversified.
I mean, he's following his customers.
Well, that's a politically correct word.
But you see, he has one of the biggest donors in China, but then he was not really recognized. He was really doing a lot of good things. A first donor in China that set up over 10 billion.
Maybe Cao Do-wang, chairman and president of Fuyao, is one of the first who is clearly aware of the risks in China, because he said you should only have one property in mainland China, given the adverse circumstances, one reason or another. What do you think of the behavior of Li Ka-shing, the richest guy in Asia, and other guys who have been so busy moving their assets and wealth out of China?
Look, the Cao Do-wang has over 25 factories in China. He only have a few overseas. The majority are in China.
When he was being interviewed by the media,
well, he doesn't do real estate business. That's true.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, in an olive-shaped society, which is characterized by the formidable army of the middle class, sophistication and stability of the society is actually enshrined in the faith, in the belief that the super rich guys will be taxed heavily. And Democrats in the United States will stand for this position, right? And there are far less underprivileged and disadvantaged social groups in the United States, for example, and other industrial nations of the OECD, than in developing countries like India, where you have millions of poor Indians living in slums. So in China, when we look at the issue of hate speech regarding the income discrepancy, do you think we are far from the stage of having a stable middle class in the olive-shaped society, and therefore it's a matter of time for us to minimize the negative impact of the hate speech regarding wealth?
Well, absolutely. I think it's all-front work. I think the 90s Party Congress report has actually, actually precisely is tackling that. We've got to address the people's, the wishes for good life and
common prosperity, and to lift those out of poverty without a single guy being marginalized in this campaign of poverty alleviation. That's beautifully said. That's, part of the charm of President Xi Jinping.
But I think the government should rely more on the business, rely on the NPO, non-profit organization, rely on charity organizations, rely on social organizations to really tackle those issues, rather than everything is handled by the government. I think that's probably it's important to do.
But structurally speaking, you also have a situation and a tradition in China. It's a very government-dominated system. The government is proclaiming, as you can see with all the party congress and the goals all the way to middle of the century, saying we'll take care of this and that. So people historically thinking maybe we should depend on the government. So I think there's room to be developed, space to be given to the newly emerged rich people and this class of them to do something for social welfare, to take societal initiatives, which is very, very dominant in the West. There's government issues on welfare society, yes, but the private sector, especially the rich, play a major role in making sure that the equality distribution issues are dealt with. So
exactly. Let me go to Robert Cap. Sorry for keeping you waiting. You have been a good listener, very quiet. But what are your thoughts on the protection of private assets in China? Do you have more grievances than constructive suggestions on amendment of the Constitution, improving the legal system, so that business people in China, particularly from the private sector, would have a better feeling of safety here, instead of moving their money out of China?
Well, I always like to think my comments are in the constructive sense and not just critiques. But in terms of your question there, Yang Rui, yes, I believe a lot probably could be done. I don't know if it would just be at the constitutional level, but to reassure all sorts of people. I mean, it obviously is endemic in society because, as your discussion on the latest statistics show, you've added hundreds of billionaires to, over 100 at least this year, but over time it's been hundreds added to this list, where before China was generally impoverished, and now it's known for having all these super rich people. So the point is, these people came from a background where they didn't have a lot of money. Once they have money, they have been moving their assets offshore. So it becomes a question, how can you reassure the Chinese people in general, not just the super rich, that, yeah, their property rights are protected and that they can feel rest assured to keep their money in China. I think part of that also deals with limiting as much as possible political risk, the sense that you'd be caught up in an anti-corruption probe if you know that what you've done has been above board. For those where it's been maybe iffy about how they acquired their wealth, well, maybe there'd be a way to work out a program. We did that in the U.S. where we allowed tax dodgers, for example, people who had cheated on their taxes, an amnesty to have them bring their wealth back into the country, and then we started enforcing the law. So there are different ways to deal with this kind of situation.
Robert, there have been a lot of public discussions on whether China will possibly have the corner overtaking with the help of digital technology. Look at the miracles of BAT and the surge in the number of super rich billionaires in recent years. China contributed most to this growth in number, about Novohish here in Asia. So do you think it is the internet, the digital technology, that have really helped the miracle?
Oh, undeniably. I mean, you look at someone like Jack Ma, Pony Ma, the whole, tech phenomena, household names now increasingly, at least in the West or other parts of the world, Xiaomi, Huawei, and so forth. These were all started by technopreneurs, to use a amalgamated term. And those are the new kind of shining examples of the super rich, not just people who relied on government connections, doing a lot of investments in property, which is the more traditional Asian model. You mentioned Li Ka-shing, he's a property tycoon, but these new super rich in China that come from a tech background or have done things that are truly creative, that's a great sign for everyone, I think, to look towards the future of China, and hopefully they'll symbolize more of what will be happening within entrepreneurship here in China.
When we look at the miracle of new wealth coming from China, Robert, I wonder if you are aware of the differences between market shares and added value of smartphones, for example. Chinese-made smartphones account for 1/3, and we are trailing behind Apple and the South Korean mobile phones. Some of the observers say, look, Yang Rui, you shouldn't just focus on the market share. Value-added aspects of smartphones, such as iPhone, should be respected. What do you think of their allegation?
Well, it's an interesting point, and for China to keep evolving to the point where it's come now, it's kind of the new kid on the block, and it has a lot of exciting technologies, but you've raised a valid point, and that is the real dominant players in this space, like with smartphones, are indeed Apple and Samsung, because they're considered to have better quality products. They can sell those at a higher price point. So it is something that the Chinese entrepreneurs could learn from, and indeed focus now on the next step of their evolution to try to do more things with unique value-added features, try to be a leader not just on price, because the Chinese phones are known as better value in terms of lower price, but not necessarily better value in terms of features. So they can get more feature-rich and really indicate that they have a lot of cutting-edge technology that you don't find in an Apple or a Samsung. That would be great. That would bode very well for China's high-tech future.
Thank you very much, Robert. Henry and Wenran, we live in an age that is increasingly characterized by at least 3 hallmark phenomena: hypermobility, 3D transformation, as well as Internet of all things. We live in an age of big data, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence. So Do you think it is in these areas that the novel rich, the super rich billionaires will make their investment? And what does that mean for the future of China's economic sustainability?
Absolutely. I think the new the market innovation that given the 1.4 billion Chinese market is really an ideal experiment ground for all this technology. So China is already leading on the speed train, is leading on the cashless society, and also leading on those the shared bicycle and things like that. One of the founder was one of the new rich that added to the list this year. So you have all those things, but also this actually goes with the Chinese transformation. For example, I know last year there were so many education companies listed on Hong Kong and NASDAQ, which created a number of billionaires. Again, the Chinese market has made all those happen, and also with new technology, as you mentioned, all those categories. I'm sure in the future there will be more billionaires out of the new industries, probably than any other place in the world.
Artificial intelligence will be the catalyst for the creation of a new, new fortune, more of the billionaires.
That's what everybody is talking about nowadays. It's a new rage, all this stuff you mentioned. But in this, our particular subject context, is worth thinking about comparison between not just the piling up of the numbers of billionaires in China and how total amount of wealth they control. We can compare this index with that of the innovation-related index, where China is comparing with other advanced industrialized countries. Yes, China is having a lot more patents being filed, granted in recent years, faster than any other country, there's no doubt about it, because of the GDP growth. So that is in correlation between the super rich growth. Yet, in terms of innovation-related commercial return ratio, China ranked very low. China is following Japan and some of the other industrialized countries in that trajectory for new technology, and yet China is yet to catch up further in the index range of them in terms of international ranking of innovations where things are. So there's the money, there's the rich, and there's many still piling in the lower level of the manufacturing spectrum rather than moving into the upper echelon.
I think the new experiment of this 1.4 billion people has generated a lot of opportunities. For example, in a new energy car, driving by battery, clean car, and China is already leading. In a speed train, so all those things, China has some technology. Will continue to lead, and I'm sure in that area. So the GM, the BMW, the Mercedes-Benz may be out of competition from China. That the new energy car will come, the driverless car will come.
Yes, so indeed, the Germans have developed a strong sense of crisis when it comes to whether China will survive. I mean, will surpass other major economies in what we call the corner overtaking. Let me go back to Robert Kapp for his analysis on, for example, more of the global capital investment by Chinese entrepreneurs. We allegedly have developed 4 new innovations, 新的4大发明, high-speed railway, e-commerce, online payment, as well as shared bicycles. It is in these areas, I'm afraid, and people share my confidence, that has generated so much new wealth. But what do you think of the prospects for having more of such?
Well, the way that these technologies in China have exploded, particularly fintech, it's often commented by foreign, that is Western executives I interact with here in Hong Kong, how much they admire the fintech that China has come out with. These are leading brands, particularly in the consumer space, that say it is so much easier for them to deal with consumers in China now, not just because the market is so large, but because they're really doing advanced payment courtesy of groups like Tencent and Alibaba. So that's very admirable. I think there is some risk of a bubble. Like with bike sharing, you see a lot of bikes piling up in Beijing and Shanghai and elsewhere because there's too much of it, and there's been a lot of companies jumping into the market. I think there's a bit of inflation in the valuation of tech companies, but overall, yeah, China has made some very impressive strides in areas particularly like fintech.
Are you suggesting that we're going to repeat the bad story of bubbles in, for example, the industry of solar panels? Over-dumping is said to be something that has violated the WTO regulations, and will come under investigation from the United States on dumping and subsidy. Is that your point?
No, I don't see it so much as a dumping issue. I see it more like the dot-com bubble in Silicon Valley of 2000, around that time frame, where you have overvaluated stocks and you could be in line for a correction in the near future.
Let's come back to examine the issue of what will happen to the super-rich billionaires. In the United States, we have Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, engaging in causes like public health and poverty alleviation. We've been talking about the philanthropy, charity, but one thing that is missing from our discussion, I'm afraid, is the legacy of family-based businesses. What about the second generation of the family businesses in terms of how to exercise modern corporate governance? I mean, more and more brilliant graduates of MBA will come back from North America, from Europe. They are good at managing corporate governance. So what do you think of the legacy?
I think there is a risk that for the second generation of China, who a lot of them actually study abroad and came back, are not even interested in doing what their parents are doing. Mm-hmm. So some of the skill they learn may not be applied to their family business. So that could be a challenge. I think that giving Chinese business always a family-centered and it's a family business, you know, in the long run, this culture will still continue. But I think that the point is that you know, the heritage should not be passed on from family to family. It really should maybe contribute to the society as well, while you can pass on wealth from family generation to generation. So that's probably the key, is that, you know, I think that there's many good examples like Ronnie Chan donated $350 million US to the Harvard, didn't leave a cent to his children. Mm-hmm. You know, for example, also Bill Gates gave.
He's very American. He's hopelessly American.
But like Bill Gates has also set a very small side to his children. So that kind of a culture, I think, still needed. It's very difficult in China with the Chinese culture.
Why is it so difficult for the Chinese to follow suit?
Well, the Chinese are too new on the rich scale that they don't know what to do yet. And I think it will take time for them to digest. But in comparison with the historical evolution of the super rich, say in the United States, European countries, it took generations to evolve where they are. Remember, they have a peer review, very advanced peer networking system on how to do with this money. They may go collection into diversification in other economic sectors. In the middle of 1920s going to arts collection, and now donating it all. Social responsibility is the norm, and the Chinese are yet to develop any of these because just too new.
Yes, let me go back to Robert. Robert, what do you think of the legislative package encouraging the super rich billionaires donating, giving their money to charitable foundations and causes? Without this incentive, I'm afraid that you just cannot bet, put your money on the conscience and the morality. I mean, this, of course, sounds pretty smart, but what about the importance of legislative measures and taxation as well?
Well, undeniably, in the U.S., for example, there is a tax advantage to donating to charity. There's also an inheritance tax, which encourages a legacy given outside one's family. So there is an institutional component. I think also, to give a slightly contrarian view on Chinese morality, I don't think it's necessarily immoral what Chinese tycoons are doing. According to the Confucian value system, to save money for your family is a virtue. I guess the issue is, how can you balance that out with obligations to society? We don't have quite that Confucian mindset in America, and entrepreneurs who get very rich like to donate their money to society as a way of giving back. If you can encourage more of that, not just through legislation, but through new ways of thinking about what it means to be successful in China, I think you can improve on the situation.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your meaningful participation in this edition of Dialogue. We have a Chinese proverb, 为富不仁，富不及三代. If you do not practice a policy or the cause of philanthropy and charity, your wealth will not possibly survive 3 generations of the family wealth. With that, we come to the end of this dialogue. I thank you for being with us. Until next time, goodbye.